look at Dante's Purgatory and the theological implications of how he divides his purgatory. He divides his purgatory into the 7 areas based upon the 7 deadly sins. So our 7 deadly sins, I don't know if everyone has them memorized, are lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. These are sort of been put in order from, in a certain manner of speaking, from least bad to worst. Lust is considered to be the least bad because in a certain sense it's just a very human failing. And as you see, they go from very human failings to pride, which is the sin of Satan himself, the sin by which Lucifer fell out of heaven into hell. There's a classical division of these sins into 2 parts, right here. The first 3, lust, gluttony, and greed, are too much love. Or how could you have too much love, of course, but love wrongly directed. The last 4 are, in a certain manner of speaking, not enough love. So they really are all love wrongly directed. For instance, pride is love directed at yourself. But you can see that there's lust, gluttony, and greed are sort of an overabundance of love wrongly directed, whereas the last 4 are sort of an insufficiency of loving others. So, Dante's Purgatory begins here with pride, and it climbs up the mountain. At the top of the mountain, we find Eden, paradise, and then up to heaven. So what we're going to be doing is climbing the mountain. The idea is that everyone who enters Purgatory climbs the mountain and spends enough time at each terrace for their sin. Now I want to clarify, the 7 deadly sins are not, in a certain manner of speaking, sins. They are the 7 reasons why people sin. Now, of course, in classical philosophy, theology, we love these lists of 7. And we say that they are complete. But I think this one really is. I often try to challenge people to come up with another reason why people sin. And we often can sort of say, well, that falls under, or that falls under, or that falls under. So these are the 7 reasons why people commit sins. And so let's begin with pride, the first of the terraces of purgatory. Now, Dante has a very systematic way of looking at it. He has every terrace, every level. He has the sin, the opposite of the sin, the punishment of the sinner, the beatitude that applies to the sinner, in other words, the beatitude that is part of the cure. Also, and this is fascinating, is how it's decorated. Beautiful statues everywhere. I mean, he's an Italian. There's that whole idea that art and beautiful art can save us, can teach us something. And that's really what Purgatory is about. And we really need to emphasize that. Dante has finished his journey through hell. He has gone down to the depths of hell. And in hell, the sinners are doing exactly what they always wanted to do. And it's hell. I was just actually recently watching a Twilight Zone episode. I don't know if any of you have seen it. But it's a great episode. As this guy dies and he ends up in a sort of a gambling parlor, and he wins all the time, and he has everything he ever wanted. By the end of the episode, he's just going crazy, and he's saying, "This isn't very good. This heaven place, I'm kind of bored with it." And the guy says, "You thought this was heaven?" And he realizes he's going to have to spend the rest of his life, the rest of eternity, bored. Because in the end, nothing can keep us interested. And that's really, if there was one moral of Dante's Divine Comedy, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, nothing is interesting enough to keep us fascinated for all eternity except God himself. So the Purgatory is all about the cure. Now there were some theologians, particularly English Reformation theologians, some of the Catholic pre-Reformation theologians, some of them saints, whose vision of purgatory was really dismal. St. John Fisher, I believe, says that the pains of purgatory are worse than the pains of hell, except for the hope that you're getting out someday. And he says the demons are there bothering you in purgatory. It really is a strange vision of purgatory. But Dante, an Italian poet, writing shortly after St. Thomas Aquinas, really is relying on St. Thomas Aquinas. His theology, the theology of St. Thomas Aquinas, is informing everything that Dante is writing. It's a beautiful vision of purgatory. Purgatory is the cure for what ails us. Purgatory is a beautiful place with music and statues and the stories of inspiration, and it's all headed up the mountain to heaven itself. So we begin with pride. The sin of pride is contrary, of course, this one's pretty obvious, to humility. Now, Dante always gives an example, many examples of this contrary, of humility. And the first example he gives is always from Mary. How is Mary humble? And so for the first, he talks about the Annunciation. He says to her, "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." Now if an angel showed up to any of us and said to me, "Hail Adam, full of grace," I think I'd find it pretty difficult to be humble after that. But Mary finds no difficulty. In fact, Mary, it says, is afraid, is frightened by the greeting. And I just love this moment. Because what is it that can frighten Mary is a threat to her humility. Nothing frightens Mary except, "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." Now, the punishment of pride is a giant rock on your back, carrying it around. And as you carry this rock around, you're forced to bend down, which is, of course, the thing that the proud do not want to do. And as they bend down, they just go around and admire the beautiful statues that explain humility, and they just spend however long admiring the statues, and then eventually the point comes that the rock gets taken off, and they go on to the next level, the level of envy, and then they work on that for a while. What's very beautiful, at the end of each of the levels, there's an angel whose wing sort of passes over you, and Dante, when he comes to purgatory, has these 7 scars which signify the 7 sins, which he himself, of course, has, as we all do. We all have a little bit of each of these, and a lot of some, and less of others. We each have our own mix. And the angel wipes away 1 scar. And by the end, of course, that's all the scars are wiped away. So, the punishment of pride, we have the to be bent down. And again, all of these punishments are about the cure. These aren't just punishments for the sake of punishment. It's not like you were proud, so you have to suffer. It's you were proud, so in order to stop being proud, you're going to have to suffer, because that's kind of all cures involve some kind of suffering. The beatitude for this is the Our Father. I'm sorry. There's a beatitude and a prayer. That, of course, the beatitude isn't the Our Father. The prayer is the Our Father. And this is a beautiful prayer for the proud, because it's admitting that someone is above you. Someone is your Father. That when we say, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name," we forget ourselves, and we only remember ourselves to the extent that we insist that we are under God in heaven. The beatitude is, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." And so this whole idea of just acknowledging and realizing that we are poor in spirit, that none of us, no matter who our ancestors were, of course for Dante living in the Middle Ages, that's a huge deal. He'll meet someone who was a great person here on earth and whose family was a great family in Italy. And it's this realizing, might be true, but really who are we? We're all poor in spirit in the face of our Father who art in heaven. And He alone belongs in that place of honor. We'll move on, because we have to keep going to get through all 7. Envy. Now, we have to really emphasize, what is the difference between envy and greed? These are not the same thing at all. So again, greed is in the area of too much overabundance of misdirected love. So if it's about, I want something, I want something, I want something, that's greed. Envy is not wanting your neighbor's car, wanting your neighbor's house, wanting your neighbor's, etc. Envy is wanting them to not have it. Envy is sadness in the face of the happiness of others. And it's amazing that we have this, and yet we do. That when someone else does well, our reaction might be a little bit of greed, a little bit of, I wish that was me, but there's also a little bit of, who do they think they are? I wish I could take them down a peg. Envy, which is linked to the commandments of thou shalt not covet, is wanting to destroy what the other person has. And so greed would lead us to steal it. Envy leads us to go over there with a hammer and smash it. And that is something we recognize in ourselves. The opposite of envy is generosity, helping others. All the envious are gathered together and they're leaning on each other. They're learning to help others and to be generous to others. Their punishment is to have their eyes sewn shut, which seems kind of harsh. Dante is relating this to a practice of training a falcon. Now, I've never trained a falcon, but I'll just take their word for it. That when you train a falcon, you have to sew its eyes shut, and so that you can really just teach it whatever it is that you need to teach a falcon. And so the idea here is that they have their eyes sewn shut, they stop looking at others, and they just start leaning on each other and realizing that someone else's good is their good too. Whenever I think of envy, I think back to a book that I read as a small child. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this Goosebumps series of books. It was a kind of scary stories for little kids that we would read. And one of the books, a girl gets 3 wishes. And for her first wish, she wishes to be the best player on her basketball team. And she goes the next day to the basketball game, and she is the best player on her basketball team. Everyone else has gotten terrible. She's exactly as good as she was before, but now everyone else in the team is really awful. And that is, in a certain sense, our desire to be the best is a desire for others to be worse than they are. We should desire to be the worst. We should say, I see in myself certain talents, certain gifts, and I hope that everyone else has even more of that than I do, because then think of how much better the world is. That is the opposite of envy. We wish everyone else were doing better than us so that everyone would be doing so well and we could be supporting each other and happy all together. There is no reason to wish people were doing worse than they are. That's a terrible sense, a terrible feeling, and yet one that we find within ourselves. The prayer... I'm not quite matching this up as well as I hope. Generous helpers. Mary's example here is Cana, the wedding at Cana. When she hears that they ran out of wine, what would we do? We're at the wedding party. They ran out of wine. Poor planners. I always knew that she couldn't plan a wedding party, I'll tell you. What does Mary do? They ran out of wine. What can we do about it? How can we help them? There's no desire on her part to make their party seem worse so that when people come to her house, they can be more impressed with the parties that she throws. But that is in us to some extent, and it's just terrible that it is. It's almost, in a certain sense, the least explicable of all the deadly sins. Like everyone else, we get. But envy, why would we want other people to do worse? But we do. The prayer for envy is Conqueror rejoice, which is interesting. All the other prayers, we pretty well know where it comes from. Conqueror rejoice, Dante quotes it as if, oh yeah, that prayer, but we're not exactly sure. There are guesses, but the other prayers, we can sort of match them up well. We don't really know what this prayer was about. But certainly, this word, rejoice, pretty much captures it, doesn't it? That when we see good in others, we should rejoice. We should celebrate that there is good anywhere in the world. The beatitude for envy is merciful. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall have mercy. And mercy, of course, is a generosity, a desire to help others. When I explain mercy, how do mercy and justice come together? A great example for me is this, that if a child, their room is a mess, now, the mother, can she just say, oh, let's be merciful, leave the room a mess? No, that's impossible. And yet that's what people expect of God. Be merciful. Let them keep sinning. That's what some people think God should be like. That's what some people think the church should be like. But it's not that at all. Justice, absolute justice. Sin is wrong. The room, it's a mess, that's wrong. You lay that down, you lay the law down first, absolutely. But then how do you bring mercy in? She says, go clean your room. And then she goes and helps the child clean his room. Because what mother would just sort of stand there and be like, go clean your room and no food until you clean the room? And no, I mean, a mother is going to want to help the child to learn to keep the room clean, but also help the child to clean the room. God gives us absolute justice. Our sins are wrong. And then he brings in mercy, a support for us to stop sinning. Mercy can never mean a love of sin, that sin is somehow okay. Next, wrath. I love the punishment of wrath. It's amongst my favorite punishments. The punishment of wrath, let me try to keep a little consistency here. The opposite of wrath is meekness. And the punishment of wrath is acrid clouds. Now, at first, a person might say, well, how does that work? So if you were angry a lot in life, there are these acrid clouds that you're walking around in. But what is that? It's annoying. So in other words, they get annoyed for 500 years and they have to not get angry about it. Now that's pretty difficult. To walk around in a constantly annoying whatever. You know, we all have that wrath. Therese of Lisieux, in her autobiography, Therese, who relates that her confessor once told her that she had never committed a mortal sin in her whole life. What an accomplishment. But she says that she was one time praying, and the nun behind her was fidgeting. You know, that rosary clicking against the pew. Click, 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 click. And she said, I knew that one look back, you know that look, would be all it would take, and she would stop it immediately. But instead, she sort of gave up trying to pray the rosary, and she began trying to pray not looking back. I mean, she really was fighting wrath there in this beautiful way, that when things annoy us, and of course annoyance is the lowest level of wrath, and yet sometimes something great and horrible in the world, and we're just like a little bit upset about it, and then watch it when someone, cuts us off in traffic. That tendency toward wrath, that tendency to just be furious that we've been treated unjustly, even in these small ways, we have to get beyond it. The prayer of the wrathful is Agnus Dei, Lamb of God. Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. Have mercy on us. If God is going to have mercy on us, then how do we treat people who annoy us, who treat us severely unjustly? We have to have mercy, and that's Jesus Christ. If you show mercy to others, you will be shown mercy. The beatitude here are blessed are the peacemakers. A lot of time, peace has to begin with us giving up our rights, our justice. Because if we get what is due us, there will never be peace. Because there's just too much injustice in the world for anyone to ever pay the debt. Except Jesus Christ pays the debt. So all the injustice that has been done to each of us, we can say that Jesus Christ paid the debt, so we can forgive. And we have that beautiful saying that if you want peace, work for justice. If you want justice, work for forgiveness. You have to begin with forgiveness. That you have to forgive the injustice. Of course, it can't simply be, all the poor of the world should forgive the injustice that we constantly heap upon them in our own lifestyle. No. We need to work for justice if you're on the one side of it. But if you're on the other side of it, the side that is suffering injustice, it has to be forgiveness, because there can never be anything that will make up for what has been done to all of us. So moving on to sloth. Laziness. Sloth is just a complete lack of love. Love being the motivating factor of everything in Dante. Love is the energy of the whole world. In Dante, the depths of hell are frozen. Satan is frozen in ice up to his waist. Hell is cold, heaven is warm. There's a saying that you can't really trace who said it originally, because there's a lot of people who say, they said it originally, but it's beautiful. The saints would freeze in hell. And this captures Thomas Aquinas, captures Dante's point. There's actually someone who calculated this. I just love this. In hell, there's molten sulfur, and in heaven, there's the heat and light of 7 suns. And someone sat down and did the math on that and proved that heaven is warmer than hell by quite a bit. But it's absolutely true, is that if love is the positive, you think in everything there's the positive and the negative. There's the thing that is and the thing that isn't. Light is, darkness isn't. There's no such thing as darkness. It's just a lack of light. There's no such thing as cold. It's just a lack of heat. There's no such thing as hatred. It's just a lack of love. And the slothful are those who just lost all their motivation. Today we would call sloth depression. Now, today we talk about mental illness. We talk about what pills a person should take to cure depression. And I think we need to strike a balance here. When looking at another person, we wouldn't say, it's just a sin. You should just get over it. You should just take up Dante's cure. But when we're looking at ourselves, absolutely, depression is something to fight against. It is never okay to be depressed. Because depression is fundamentally sloth. It's a lack of love. Now you can point to all sorts of causes, events in our life, brain chemistry, etc., etc. But it must be fought against. It's never okay to just say, I'm depressed, and that's what I am. So the slothful, the opposite is love. The punishment is cross-country running. They did nothing when they could have done something. And that's what we see life as, this gift given to us by God. Every second that we play Angry Birds or any other game on our cell phone is a second given to us by God that we have thrown in the trash. Every second that we sit in front of the television, every second that we... And I say that, and I do not say that as somebody who uses every second in a beautiful, inspiring way. I don't know how to figure that out. Is all entertainment wrong? I don't know. But I can't, Mother Teresa didn't sit down and play Angry Birds. She was way too busy. She had way too much loving to do. St. Francis didn't sit and play a game of backgammon. Because it's not like these wasteful games are something new. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong. Again, this isn't so much about what you say to others. It's what you say to yourself. How am I using my time? God has given me this time. Okay, maybe I'd go crazy if I tried to do everything all the time. But I have to do something some of the time. It is not okay to waste a life. It might be okay to waste a second, a minute, an hour, even a day. It's not okay to waste a life. The prayer of the slothful, I love this. So, there is none. There is no prayer for the slothful. Whereas every other level has its special prayer. And so people speculate. Why? It's not as if Dante says there's no prayer and here's why. It just is that he doesn't give one. Is it because he somehow halfway through forgot that he had this whole system going? I don't think so. And so some people speculate it's because they're too busy running. They don't have time to stop and pray. That in a certain sense, they're fighting against inactivity, and so a verbal prayer isn't enough. That the prayer here is action. That sometimes you have to get up and go do something. You have to get up and serve the poor. You have to get up and whichever. So no prayer, just running. Then the beatitude is mourn. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Because, again, sloth is depression. Did Dante have that name for it? No. But he identifies it here. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. That Jesus puts that there, exactly. And Dante sees in it what Thomas saw in it, this mourning that we have in this world. Nothing is going to be good enough. Why do anything? And if we remember that this life is not all there is, there's something that comes after it, then everything we do suddenly has meaning. That there's the temptation of sloth is the temptation to believe that life has no meaning, that it doesn't matter what we do. But it does. It absolutely does matter what we do. Greed. So now we do have simple greed, the desire for things of the earth. The opposite of greed is poverty. And here, I haven't been giving the Marian examples, which are beautiful, and so I don't want to skip them. So we had the Annunciation, we had the wedding at Cana. For wrath, the meekness of Mary is shown when she finds Jesus in the temple. What would a normal parent have done? What does Mary do? Why are you here? How could you have caused us such grief? Sloth, the visitation. Mary has the Annunciation experience. What would we want to do then? We would want to just relax, sit in it, bask in the glory of that beautiful prayer moment. What does Mary do? It says she makes haste immediately for the hill country. She runs to Elizabeth. She finds out that Elizabeth is pregnant, her cousin, who'd been barren her whole life, and she runs to the hill country. Why? To share in the joy. She runs to the hill country to assist in the pregnancy, which she stays until John the Baptist is born. Mary was not slothful. She worked hard. And we see that in that immediately upon finding out that she's pregnant, and ran to the hill country. That's not like, 2 blocks over. That's in the movie, they made that movie, the Nativity movie, which I'm so torn on because there are beautiful moments in it, And then there's like, oh my goodness, why did you do that? Like for instance, in the Magnificat, they take out all generations shall call me blessed. I suppose it's made by Protestants. They don't want to encourage us Catholics because Mary said it, it's in the Bible, but eliminate that line because the Catholics believe it. I honestly don't know how they could just have pulled a line out of the Magnificat. And then in the hill country, Mary hops on a wagon and rides it to the hill country, mostly because she's too embarrassed about being pregnant. That is not what happened. Immediately, she ran to the hill country. All right. So back to greed. Poverty. We see poverty in Bethlehem. That's Mary's experience of poverty. If she'd wanted, she could have given birth in the finest places in the world, finer than any hospital available today. If she had said to God, if you're going to have me do this, I am definitely going to require an epidural, I don't know what. But she instead gave birth in the lowest of the lowest of the lowest place. Not at home. She could have been at home. She didn't have to go to Bethlehem. But she's not going to leave Joseph. She knows the mission. She knows that Jesus is the son of David. She, complete poverty, no desire for the things of the earth. And this is, absolutely, the greed is the desire to get these things of the earth. So the punishment of the greedy is they lie face down. They are looking at the dust, the dirt. This is what you wanted. Because in the end, that's what we want. Now, I'll take my dust in the form of a nice phone or made into a car or whatever, but all it is dust. The prayer is the psalm, my soul cleaves to the ground, to the dust. Revive me by your word, by your law. This is Psalm 119, the longest of the Psalms, where every other line is praising the law, the word of God. And so my soul cleaves to the dust. I just can't break myself free of grabbing onto this earth, this creation that you made. It's good. He made it. He said that it was good. Revive me by your word. It's a kind of death. Wanting the things of this earth is a sort of death. That poverty, the people who are truly poor, they're far more alive than the people who are reaching out in this world to hold on to dust in its various shapes. The Beatitude here, again, you're just dealing with Dante in Italian. Where's the system to it? He has a Beatitude. So he's got 7 sins, and there are 7 or 8 Beatitudes, depending on how you count them. And instead of using all 7, he splits 1 in 2, and he doesn't use 1. I don't know why. But he says here, blessed are those who thirst for righteousness. The one for gluttony is going to be, blessed are those who hunger for righteousness. He wants to emphasize it twice. And the point is that link between greed and gluttony, that they're different, but they're similar. What's the difference between wanting to hold the things of the earth and wanting to eat or drink the things of the earth? But we're supposed to hunger and thirst for righteousness, for the things of God, for the law of God. Revive me by your word. So blessed are those who thirst for righteousness. Now, after they've passed through this level of greed, suddenly a Gloria is begun. It sort of just breaks the action, and the Gloria is sung. And Dante is just so inspired, and then they move on, and just this beautiful moment of poetry in the middle of it. That okay, we've had a lot here. We need a Gloria. What is it symbolizing? It's symbolizing that you're nearing the top of the mountain. Purgatory is all about your vision of God. It can't be anything like hell. What keeps the slothful running? Why is it that the envious have their eyes sewn shut and they're supporting each other and they're perfectly okay with it? The proud have this rock and they're bent over and they're just going around and trying to learn their lesson. It's because all of them see what's ahead. And as you grow closer, you see it better and better and better. That it just makes you want to climb to the top of the mountain. There's no question, and in Catholic theology, no one fails purgatory. It's impossible. You get to purgatory, you're going to heaven. It's just a question of how long. So moving to gluttony. Gluttony, the opposite is justice, which he phrases in this amazing way. We've consumed the things of this earth. How much do you owe God? And it's not quite how he puts it, but I think of like a restaurant. You go in, you order what you want, and the bill comes at the end. So we've consumed the things of the earth. How much do we owe God? And that is something that we in the first world countries can absolutely talk about. That when we look at how much of the world's resources we consume, the fact that we're polluting the world in order to have our own things, and we're not just polluting the world here, but you go to China, the air pollution is terrible. Is that because the Chinese don't have any controls on air pollution? No, it's because we demand the things that get made in those factories. And so our demand for the things of this earth cause the destruction of the earth and cause especially the suffering of the poor. Because as pollution ravages the earth, it's the poor who suffer. We have beautiful water filtration systems. They drink out of rivers that have been polluted by the factory that made the little plastic thing that for some reason we needed to have. The gluttonous, they fast. Although in a beautiful way, Dante comes to this level and he starts smelling, oh, that's beautiful. And there's these fruit trees, and he's like, oh, that's the best fruit I've ever seen. And the gluttonous are like sitting next to the fruit trees, looking at the fruit trees, not eating. and they get emaciated. They look as if they have fasted for a couple hundred years. And there's a whole discussion of the metaphysics of this. Because, of course, the people in purgatory don't have bodies. They are just souls that have gone, and they don't get their bodies back until the end of time. We all will receive our bodies back at the end of time. So they're just souls. And so Dante says, well, how could a soul look like they're starving if they're not actually in need of food? Because none of the other people are eating either, but suddenly these people aren't eating and they're like starving. And it's explained to him, this relationship between the body and the soul, and it's a whole beautiful little metaphysical argument about standing in a mirror, and as you move your body a certain way, your soul moves in the mirror. So if you want a little philosophy there. But it is a point that all of these sufferings of purgatory have been expressed in terms of a bodily suffering. But of course it's not. It's a soul suffering. And what does that feel like? I think we've all felt that. It's the suffering of the rich young man. Now, what does that happen? The rich young man runs to Jesus, falls down on his knees, says to Jesus, "What do I have to do to get to heaven?" And Jesus says, "Follow the commandments." And the young man says, "I do. What else? What more?" And Jesus says to him, "If you want to be perfect, go, sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and then come follow me." And now that's the end, right? That's the end of the story, except it's not. If you go to Mark's Gospel, at the end of Mark's Gospel, when Jesus is kidnapped, taken in the Garden of Gethsemane, there's a little sentence there that sometimes gets ignored because it's Good Friday and you don't have time to preach on it. You've read the whole story and there are more important things to preach on. And there was a young man there Not a rich young man, a young man, wearing nothing but a bedsheet. Well, of course, it doesn't say bedsheet exactly, but a piece of cloth. Not clothes. All he has left, he sold everything, it seems like. Because I think that is the rich young man. And some people think it's Mark. That he went and sold everything he had, but he went away sad. Why? It's this feeling you have. When you fight against any of these 7, you have this feeling in your soul of sadness. And sometimes it makes us give in. Sometimes we call that temptation. And in a certain way, it is a kind of temptation. But if we decide to love that suffering, instead of temptation, it becomes a beautiful signal that we're headed in the right direction. Every now and then, you look at something you have, greed, attachment to the things of the earth, you decide, I'm going to give that away. You become extremely sad. But I need that. And then you know, I need to give that away is what I need to do. That feeling, it's a pain, isn't it? And we say, I can't possibly do that. I can't possibly fast. I mean, we're supposed to be fasting every single Friday. It's amazing how we lost that. At Vatican II, not exactly at Vatican II, but shortly afterward, the U.S. bishops got together and they said, you know what, eating meat Friday, seriously, people go out for lobster. Forget about it. Find a way to make Friday penitential. And yet, how many people do it? People say, we can eat meat on Friday now. Great. But how many people say, and I never watch television on Friday? Because it isn't about eating meat on Friday and now it's okay and it used to be bad. It was, you're supposed to find a way to suffer every single Friday. To pick one of these sins, the one that grabs you the greatest, and to suffer.
Even if it's the feast day of St. Francis?
Even if it's the feast day of St. Francis. Now, maybe giving up meat isn't that big a deal. In this country, it really isn't. We eat meat practically every day of the week. You give up some meat, you're doing okay. Maybe you need to go sit in the church for an hour. And then when you really want to leave after a half an hour, then you stay. And there's that pain that's like pulling you out of the church, and you just stay through the pain. Whatever it is that will cause you the most mental anguish, that's the one you should be doing every single Friday. Friday is still a day of penance. Giving up meat was just the way we used to all do it together. And there's a beautiful thing to that, to all doing it together. And that's why a lot of people think we need to start it. It's why in 1983, the U.S. bishops said, and everyone should start that meat thing again on Friday, and then everyone ignored them. But we definitely need to find, as the original document says, our own personal way of causing ourselves a little bit of purgatory on Fridays. And then for all of Lent. When someone says, for Lent, I'm giving up mint chocolate chip ice cream, what is that? I'm giving up cookies, I'm going to eat brownies instead. No, Lent should be causing yourself severe pain. Not physical pain necessarily, although there were saints who did that. But you can cause yourself some pretty severe pain by saying, I am not going to do any entertaining of myself during Lent. No TV, no novels, no anything. That will drive you crazy. Every single person has something that they could give up that would cause severe pain. And then you say, it's too hard, I can't possibly do it. But the answer is, no, it's exactly what you need to do. So gluttony, the prayer for gluttony is Labia mea Domine. Of course, they're all in Latin, and I'm putting them in English sometimes. But I'm putting this one in Latin because it's part of the Liturgy of the Hours. It's the first words that we speak, those of us who say the Liturgy of the Hours. Every single day, the first words that we say every single day is Labia mea Domine, Lord, open my lips. Now, Dante's kind of playing with it a little bit, because of course the gluttonous say, Lord, open my lips and let me fill myself. But the prayer is, Lord, open my lips and my mouth will proclaim your praise. The reason we open our mouth should be to preach the gospel, not to fill ourselves. The beatitude here, as I said before, is blessed are those who hunger for righteousness, for justice. Now we're left with just one more. I'm going to have a little bit more room here. I'm going to put it here instead. Lust. The opposite of lust, chastity, abstinence. And I didn't say here, the Marian one for gluttony, he says the wedding of Cana again. And he emphasizes how she wasn't so consumed with partying herself that she couldn't notice what people needed. She was far more interested in what other people needed than in what she wanted. He also mentions, though, in the sort of the same breath, John the Baptist and his locusts and honey, that in order to become a great prophet, you gotta, give up the pleasures of this life to some extent. For chastity, of course, Mary, the Virgin Mary, and he quotes her statement at the Annunciation, "I know no man." Now, this is so misinterpreted. Of course, there are so many people who are trying to imply that Mary was only a virgin until after Christ was born. Catholics don't believe that. Protestants often teach it. It's clearly not true. Why? Now, just imagine the context. An angel shows up to a woman who is engaged to be married and says to the woman, "You're going to have a baby." What is the proper response? Interesting. Okay. What is Mary's response? "I know no man." That'd be a stupid response if her point was simply, "I have up until this point not had intercourse with a man." Because the answer, of course, would be, "Yeah, you're getting married in like a week." No, she says, "I know no man." In Greek, the verb tenses are very important. She does not say, "I haven't known a man," which would be dumb. She says, "I know no man." She's stating that she has already taken a vow of virginity. How is it possible, she is saying, that I am to have a baby when in my prayer and relationship with God, I have already come to the conclusion that I am to vow myself to virginity? So now that whole thing makes a whole lot more sense, doesn't it? So we know from that line that Mary was vowed to virginity before the angel came to her. This isn't as if the angel changed her whole vocation. She was vowed to virginity. Why was she marrying Joseph? Because in that culture, a woman can't simply be vowed to virginity and support herself. She wasn't allowed to work. The plan in the tradition, as has always been described, but we know from that line, was always that it would be a chaste marriage and that Joseph was going to take care of her, she would take care of the house. There's a long-standing tradition that Joseph was already married, a widower. His wife had died. He had other children who would then be stepbrothers and stepsisters of Jesus, which explains those mentions of brothers and sisters in the Bible. And that, in a certain way, Mary is sort of moving into the house, going to help raise these other kids, and Joseph is going to provide for her the way a husband would provide for a wife in that culture. Lust, the punishment is fire and hugging, which is this fascinating little punishment. So they're standing in fire. There's a giant fire. They're all standing in it. And they're going up to each other. They give each other a hug. They turn away. They go up to somebody else. They give each other a hug. They go away. They go up to somebody else. They give each other a hug. It's about learning the proper relationship between human beings does not have to be sexually consumed. And how true is that in our culture? The idea in our culture that no human being can love another person without having sex with them. And that's what the whole problem of homosexuality is in our culture, of gay marriage in our culture. Because people say, "But I love them." And the proper response is, "Good. That does not mean you should have sex with them." Sex is for children. That's the purpose. That's the clear, natural purpose of sex. It has a unitive purpose also. But the clear, natural purpose, the first intention of sex, has to be children, just as the first intention of eating has to be nourishment, and the first intention of all natural acts is what they are for. And so if we in this culture would just learn what Dante was talking about there, to love other people without, in our mind, immediately thinking, "And we should have sex." Because that is just a self-consumed idea. That's not really love. It's like love turning itself back upon itself. The prayer here is Summe Deus clementiae, great is the Lord of mercy. In a sense, the implication here is that, as Jesus has said in Scripture, he who looks upon a woman with lust in his heart has already committed adultery with her. In other words, we all, because of our natural human condition, constantly fail at this. There's an old saying that a young priest once asked an older priest, "When do you stop lusting after women?" And he says, "I don't know, it hasn't happened yet." That it isn't just about the explicit sins of it. Of course, it's not that hard, although it can be very hard, especially for young people in our culture consumed with internet pornography. And I don't think people realize how absolutely endued our culture is with internet pornography. That by the time someone is in high school, they have seen everything. And when I taught, or phrase that differently, when I 13 years ago worked on the IT team for I was in seminary, but I was working IT for my work study, and I used to go into the male dorm. It was disgusting because all they did, video games and porn. And it's why the dropout rate for men in college has skyrocketed. Because they go to college, they play video games, they look at porn, and that's all they do, they don't study. Now, there have been cultures in the history of humanity that have not been as obsessed as we are. And yet, even in those cultures, lust is just there. So we say the clemency of God. Also because that this sin is always associated with shame. There's always this aspect that there is no way I could possibly be forgiven for this sin. Because there's just so much shame. In a certain sense, someone can be proud of pride. They might even find a way to be proud of envy and wrath. And then as you start going up or down, depending on how you look at it, it's harder to be proud of greed, and yet you find people who are. There's that great speech in that movie Wall Street about how greed is good. And proud of gluttony, but you do find people who are proud of gluttony. And then proud of lust, and you're down to the lowest dregs of society, the TV talk shows. And now society is trying to tell us to be proud of lust, and they're succeeding to some extent, but they're also not, because there's so much shame associated with it. The blessing here is, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. So here, Dante has climbed to the top of Mount Purgatory. He's about to enter into the earthly paradise of Eden, and then from there go to heaven. He's had at each stage, an angel has wiped off one more sin off his forehead, but now he gets to the place of lust, and whereas every other one, he didn't have to go through it, even though he identified in himself that sin, it wasn't his time to go through purgatory. But when he comes to this sin, he has to pass through the fires. And he's very much afraid, as we would be, to be told to walk through a fire. But he has to pass through the fires, which partly is a reference to the scripture, 1 Corinthians 3, where St. Paul, the clearest reference to purgatory in the New Testament. There are many references, and then there's some good Old Testament references, but here we have, according to the grace of God given to me, like a wise master builder, I laid a foundation, and another is building upon it. But each one must be careful how he builds upon it. For no one can lay a foundation other than the one that is there, namely Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on this foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, or straw, the work of each will come to light, for the day will disclose it. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each one's work. If the work stands that someone built upon the foundation, that person will receive a wage. But if someone's work is burned up, that one will suffer loss. The person will be saved, but only as through fire. Do you not know that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. For the temple of God, which you are, is holy. So we're going to be saved as though through fire. That in the end, our whole life is going to be set on fire. The parts that are gold and silver and precious stones will come out the other end with no problem. The parts that's wood, hay, and straw, it's going to be burned up. And when we look at our life, having passed through fire, are we going to see something beautiful or are we going to see ashes? But as long as, if we see ashes, we say, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner, we'll still get to heaven. But that doesn't mean that our goal should be to get to purgatory. I've heard some people say that sometimes. As long as I get into purgatory, I don't care. No, we're supposed to build something great here. We're supposed to experience the purgatory here. We're supposed to experience that suffering, that mental anguish that keeps us turning to these 7 deadly sins here. So that we can get through it, we can get beyond it. We're never going to be completely cured here on earth. But when we get to purgatory, hopefully we're not in the very, very lowest and spending the most time possible. The goal is to sort of just shoot right through it if we can. I just want to read one passage from Dante that I think is just very interesting. It sort of captures it for me. This is in the area of wrath. Each prayer they sang began with Agnus Dei. The same words sung in unison produced an atmosphere of perfect harmony. Master, those voices, are they shades I hear? I asked, and he to me, yes, you are right, and they are loosening the knot of wrath. What an image, I love that, loosening the knot of wrath. And who are you, whose body cleaves our smoke? You speak of us as though you still belonged with those who measure time by calendars. And some people make so much difficulty of this whole question of time. 500 years in purgatory and 300 years in purgatory. It says in the Bible, a day is like 1,000 years, 1,000 years is like a day. That, if we have to spend 1,000,000 years in purgatory, it doesn't mean that 1,000,000 years passes here on earth. How much time is it going to take to cure us of everything that ails us? We need to get started now.